Hi, Awesomes. Welcome back to Sorta Awesome. I'm your host, Meg Teets, and I am thrilled to be joined today by my longtime co-host, longtime dear friend, Rebekah Hoffer of simplyrebekah.com. Hi, Rebekah. How are you?
Hi. I have a confession.
Oh,
I
let's start off things with a confession. Why not? Let's hear it.
Okay, so you're like, I'm gonna hit record. I'm like, great, I am ready. And then I was like, you know what? I think the font on my notes is just a little too small. So I'm gonna go and I'm gonna fix that. And then I went and I did that. And then shoot, what do you know? I forgot that like we're on video now on YouTube.
Oh.
And like here I am, stoic looking, concentrating, trying to get myself organized, not smiling or paying attention to the camera at all. And it's the intro to the whole video. Like, I think we
And
need to
your
start
face is like,
again. I'm like, I'm not even here.
I'm like, I am thrilled to welcome my friend Rebekah, and you're just like stone face, like, I'm so glad to be
I'm
here.
so glad I'm here. No. Oh my word, that's embarrassing.
No,
I'm not
listen,
used to this.
that's what I was going to say. It's totally reasonable. For the better part of 8 years, we've never given one thought to what we actually were looking like on camera. We just used our video screens to just talk to each other, but now it's recorded for posterity.
I'm like kind of embarrassed.
Don't be embarrassed.
Okay.
Don't be embarrassed. But now that is a great organic teaser for people to go over and check out. Sorta Awesome on YouTube. I love it. I love it. That's so fun. I also love that you had a really fun idea for a conversation today. It's something that we've kind of like touched on maybe here and there, but I don't think we've ever had a whole conversation devoted to the topic of the angst, the internal warfare that goes on when we have to make a decision if we're going to quote unquote DNF or did not finish a book. And we were like, let's talk about other things in our lives too, like maybe TV shows, other things. This came from real life for you. We're going to talk more about it, but like this was a real life thing that you were like struggling with, right?
Yeah. I'm a firm believer in DNFing. However, when it comes time for me to actually do it, there is angst.
Ooh. Okay. So it's like you're like theoretically on board. You would tell anybody, go ahead, just toss the book, do not finish it. But when you have to apply it to your life, you get a little
Yeah.
angsty.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, God. We have a lot to unpack here. I cannot wait to get into that discussion with you. We're going to get to that in just a few minutes today here on Sorta Awesome. Okay. It lost my notes. So welcome back, Awesomes, to the show that loves to support you in becoming smart, strong, and social. If you have been looking for amazing women to connect with, and also a community that will support you no matter what age or stage of life you're in, I am really happy to tell you that you have found it. You've come to the right place because Sorta Awesome is not just a podcast. We are also your community on the go. We would love to have you connect with us in one of our social media communities outside of your podcast app, whether you're listening to us right now in an app like Overcast, or maybe you listen on Spotify or wherever you're listening, leave that app at some point and come over and check us out on Facebook in the Sorta Awesome Hangout. It's the heart of our community. Or you can find us on Instagram at Sorta Awesome Show. We would love to have you join us over there. And as we mentioned, we're on YouTube. We're just in all of the places. So come and find us. We would love to have you join our community because that's where the magic happens. Rebekah, I'm so excited to get into this talk about the internal battles that we go through and how we work through these decisions if we're going to finish something, if we're going to DNF, if we're going to like push through. What's the value in pushing through sometimes? What's the value in quitting? So much to talk about there. But first, let's go ahead and start this show the way we always do with our Awesomes of the Week. If you're new to Sorta Awesome, Awesome of the Week is the moment in the show where we stop and talk about whatever is making life just a little bit more awesome right now. Whether it is a book or a TV show, a movie, a podcast, a product, an app, a recipe, whatever it is that's bringing that gold sparkle to our days. I can't wait to hear what you brought for us this week.
Well, I brought a book that I will be shocked if people DNF, although you have permission. The book is called Scandalized, and it is by Ivy
Mm,
Owens. Of course, it's a romance novel, as I am so prone to be a fan of. Meg, have you heard of this book?
I have not, so please do tell me everything. By the title alone, I'm intrigued.
Okay, well, this book was released last August, and it actually was written by Lauren, half of Christina Lauren.
What? She
Yes.
she went out on her own. She split from the I mean, this isn't like a permanent split, is it?
Oh no, I don't think so. I don't think so. They
Okay,
have another book
good.
that's being released, or maybe it already came out this year. So no, they are still writing
Oh,
together,
okay.
but this she has this
Yes.
like side project under this other pen name.
Oh
It's very exciting.
my. Okay. I'm super Scandalized the title. I was like intrigued. Now I'm super into this. I can't wait to hear like what's it about?
Well, this was one of the best contemporary romances that I've read in a while. It is
Whoa.
open door with multiple spicy scenes, and it is hitting on several quality tropes, Meg. We have celebrity
Okay.
with like a non celebrity. We have best friend's older brother. We have childhood
Oh.
crush, one night stand that always turns into more, different worlds that seem impossible to blend together. Oh, what will they do? It's so good.
Oh my gosh. I'm loving all of the notes this is hitting so far.
So we have
Yes.
in Scandalized, we have Gigi, who runs into her childhood crush Alec after a flight has been canceled. They reconnect in a hotel lobby, and Alec finds Gigi to be incredibly refreshing because she has no idea that Alec is actually a superstar.
Oh.
You see,
How? Oh.
Alec and his
Thanks.
family had moved out of the country when he was a teenager, and he caught his
Okay.
big break acting overseas. Now, forgive me, I cannot remember the country that he
Okay.
went big in, but it's that
Yes.
type of thing. And he's only
Sure,
just
sure.
now about to hit like the United States with his stardom.
Okay.
So Gigi was like clueless about Alec and his fame. And so for the first time in a really long time, Alec felt wanted for who he is rather than for his
Mm,
celebrity status.
right. Yes.
Sparks flew between Gigi and Alec, and their one night stand turns into a connection and chemistry between them that they cannot ignore. And I would also say that Scandalized would be a good read alike if you enjoyed the book Part of Your World by Abby Jimenez, that shares that same like unexplainable lust connection with their
Yes.
worlds kind of like pulling them apart. It would be a really good
Yes.
read alike if you're a fan of that book.
Mhm. Mhm.
So I
Mhm.
will say that there is a trigger warning though for discussion of sexual assault, because a big plot point in the book is that Gigi's job is an investigative journalist and she's working on a major story uncovering some sexual assault. So if that's an issue, you
Whoa.
should keep that in
Okay.
mind.
Okay.
I will say that the cover of this book looks kind of like weird and cheap. It looks like, I don't know. It looks kind of like indie, self-published. Is this really going to be any good? But it's Lauren of
Really?
Christina Lauren, so like it's going to be good, right? So don't
Yes.
judge the book by the cover. I think the cover's kind of weird. And
Okay.
also the paperback version I think on Amazon is pretty pricey, but the ebook version is cheaper. Plus it's on Kindle Unlimited, and of course you can check the library. My library did have it. So the book
Okay.
again is called Scandalized by Ivy Owens, but really,
Okay.
it's Lauren.
That is fascinating. I looked up the cover. Let me see. Will that show? Yeah, a little bit. Nope, it's
Oh,
not doing the
that
right.
looks
Look,
better
there's
than
two
what
different. There's two different covers, is what I'm seeing. Here's
Okay,
this one,
that
but
one looks better.
is this the one you were
Nah,
talking
that
about with
one.
the
That one I'm
with the
kind of like,
purple fireworks? You're not feeling
like,
the fireworks.
this was made in Canva. I don't know.
It does give strong Canva energy, which look, I respect. I'm a very frequent Canva user, but it's funny because it's giving Canva energy, but this is a very, very extremely well-established romance author. So you would think there would be a
Right.
little, I don't know. Covers are funny things, right?
They
And
are.
one thing that we know from having a number of friends who are published authors is that authors have a little bit of say, but they don't have like all the say in how the cover comes out. So who knows?
Right.
Who knows? What Rebekah is trying to say is maybe overlook the cover and read the book and
Yes.
enjoy. This
It
sounds
was so
like
good.
we're getting into summer reading season.
Mhm.
I love a contemporary romance in the summer. So great.
Yes.
I'm going to try to get to this before Katie Proctor and I put together our like ideas for summer reading because I think this would be great on the list. So perfect timing, my friend. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, interestingly enough, but probably no surprise for the awesomes who know us well, especially our superstar awesomes, our Patreon supporters who really get the inside scoop from Rebekah and I. Both of us have awesomes of the week that are adjacent to sex.
I was like, where is this going? And that is not what I thought you were going to say. Oh, dear.
I mean, yeah.
Meg,
Truly,
my mother
the superstars
listens
are
to
like,
this podcast.
but she's not for a reason. I know she's not on the Patreon, so
She's going to need some extra context as to why you said all that. Okay, anyway,
they'll
what's
let
your
you
awesome
take care of
the
that
week?
conversation.
Great, she's going to be texting me for sure.
Yep. Okay, so my awesome of the week this week is a series within a bigger podcast. So the podcast is Karina Longsworth. Her podcast, You Must Remember This. Now, I don't know if you've heard of this podcast, Rebekah, but it is a long time, long running. I think it started in 2014, so
Oh,
it even
geez.
predates
No,
Sorta
but
Awesome.
no, I haven't heard of it.
Okay, so in You Must Remember This, Karina Longsworth has been basically documenting and exploring the first century of Hollywood, starting back in like the 20s and the 30s. And she's just been telling stories and kind of doing deep dives, honestly, on different topics. Well, starting around the beginning of this year, she started a series on the 80s, and it's called Erotic 80s. And now she's on into the 90s, and she's continuing that motif of exploring the erotic 90s. And what she's doing is so fascinating. She's looking at the portrayal of sex, like both the actual portrayal of sex, but more than that, the sort of like what we can understand about culture in America in the 80s and 90s through the lens of how we portrayed sex, sexual relationships, how we talked about it, specifically through the lens of film, but also commentary on like broader pop culture themes at the time, things that were happening in like current events. For example, one of the episodes in the Erotic 80s series on You Must Remember This deals with the topic of AIDS and how, as the AIDS crisis was unfolding, how at first it was very much not talked about, not acknowledged, and then that decade continues, then you have actual what am I looking for, material that's being created, films and TV shows and books that are addressing it. So sometimes she'll take like a current events thing and kind of explore it, but basically she's going almost like year by year through each decade and pulling out popular movies and looking at how they portrayed sex, again, like going back to the Erotic 80s series. She like talks about Dirty Dancing, and there's all kinds of really, really fascinating conversations. Well, now she's into the Erotic 90s. Now, I myself, as class of 95, the 90s were when I was just for the first time had even access to movies that had some kind of sexual theme going. They were sexual in nature. And it's so good. And I want to say this because she's doing this in such a smart, like thought-provoking way. I love a nostalgia podcast, and there are so many podcasts that center around nostalgia. I do think that nostalgia, just for the sake of like warm, fuzzy feelings and like, oh, I remember this, like that can be interesting, but it doesn't really hold your interest for me anyway. I love when nostalgia is combined with like a critical lens that helps us to better remember who we were individually
Yes.
and also
Yes.
collectively at a certain time. So I think it's just so thought provoking. I've been loving both of the series, Erotic 80s and Erotic 90s. And I will say, even if this does not sound like your usual cup of tea, not something you would usually tune into, I want to point you to one specific episode to go check out. It came out, it was dropped in early April. And the title of the episode is Pretty Woman Sleeping with the Enemy and Julia Roberts in the Early 90s. And it just kind of traces Julia Roberts' rise to fame, really provides some fascinating commentary on the movie Pretty Woman, which I know like many people, I was going to say many women, but many people in my sort of
Mhm.
age group have seen that movie probably a dozen times, maybe more.
Iconic.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And so it just kind of, again, deep dives the movie, Julia Roberts' Rise to Fame. It just kind of like re-examines what works about that film, what it says about our view on things like sex work and also love and romance, money, class, so many things that are really encapsulated in that film. So even if you don't think you would be into that series, which I'm going to link in the show notes, but you could just go listen to that one episode. It's like an hour long and it's so fascinating. So that's been really awesome this week to check out.
Sounds good. I'm excited to look into it.
Yes. Okay. So we will put links in the show notes for our awesomes of the week. And as always, we really, really cannot wait to hear what's awesome in your life. We're going into the summer season coming up. And it's kind of a time when, people they're out and they're doing things. They have big family things going on. Like we have graduation and there's weddings and like there's all these things and people are leaving for vacation. Our community kind of goes into summer mode. But I love that every Friday, predictability, structure comes back to our life because every Friday we know we can depend on gathering to share all of our awesomes of the week. So we can do that over on Facebook in our Sorta Awesome Hangout. I'll have a link in the show notes for you for that, or on Instagram at Sorta Awesome Show. So yes, would love to hear from you on that. Rebekah, we have a really good conversation that I cannot wait to dive into. We're going to get to that when we come right back. We are back. And this week, Rebekah and I want to have a conversation about the process of deciding to DNF. Again, that stands for, in online lingo, did not finish. A book, could be a TV show. We're going to talk about that a little bit too. And just the sort of like conflict that some of us feel about whether or not to DNF a book. Now, I think it's so fascinating, Rebekah, that at the top of the episode that you said that you're generally in favor of DNFing a book, like on a theoretical level. You're okay with it, right?
1,000%. Yes,
Okay.
I think that there is a right way and a wrong way to handle whether or not you DNF a book. And I think the right way
Ooh.
is always to quit the book. I I'm a firm believer that that's the right way to live. But for some
Okay.
reason it's so hard.
Yes. Okay, let's talk about what makes it hard. And I know you actually had a specific book that you were kind of wrestling with. You have a couple that you want to talk about because I feel like there's sometimes you can pick up a book and start it and just be like, I mean, I think most readers will just be like within a few pages even, or maybe their first chapter, just be like, you know what, this isn't for me, and set it to the side or return it to the library. What is it that makes it hard? What brings up that angsty struggle for you, do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree with that, that there's some books that you can quit super easy. No angst, right? Well, I was reading a book and I'm not afraid to say the names of these books, but this one I will keep to myself just because I truly thought it was just kind of boring and like that feels a little bit more insulting than some of the other
Oh,
reasons
yeah, yeah,
why I have
yeah.
quit book.
Uh-huh.
I was reading it and I was like, but I got, like, so far into it, like, maybe over 50%, and then I had that little voice in my head that went, "I'm kinda bored. I'm just not into this."
Mm.
And
Mhm.
the struggle was that I had multiple people recommend this book to me. I had
Okay.
people that I don't really know, but follow me online, send me DMs and say, "You specifically, I think, would like this book." I
Mm.
had a friend of the show Lori Lynn. Lori Lynn, are you listening? I'm
Mhm.
so sorry. She
Mhm.
recommended this book. And for like a second, we were even talking about whether we wanted to use it for the Superstars book club. And there was like lots of agreement in that conversation. Oh, yes, that'd be a good one. And I was like, oh, but wait, I'm not enjoying it. Like when somebody
Okay.
recommends it to you,
Mhm.
I feel like
Mhm.
it's one thing to say, "Yeah, thank you for the recommendation. It ended up not quite being for me." Like, that feels, like, kind of okay, but to
Right.
say, "Yeah, I couldn't even finish it," like,
Yeah.
that's a tough pill to swallow.
It
That was
really
hard.
is. Yeah. I have in my notes that there are really only 2 kind of big circumstances where I find it an emotional struggle to DNF a book, and one of those is when somebody that I respect their reading taste
Mhm.
or somebody, like, really super enthusiastically recommended it on a personal level. Like you were saying, if I'm watching TikTok and I get a lot of book talk TikToks,
Right.
people raving
Mhm.
about books. And so if I'm like, "Oh, that sounds interesting," and I, like, go put it on my Kindle or whatever, and I check it out and I'm like, no, it's not for me." Like, there's no investment on my part. Like, a
Right.
stranger online told me to check it out. So, I don't really feel conflicted about that. But like you said, if somebody specifically says, "I think you personally, based on what I know about you, your reading taste, the things you're into, I think you'll
Yes.
really love this book." For me, the still recovering people pleaser, like, I'm probably gonna finish it even if I hate it
Right?
because I feel so
So
bad.
I did end up finishing that book. I did. Like, I just couldn't not. And by the time
Yeah,
that I was, like, really ready to be done with it and had, like, talked to myself about why I'm not liking it and why I keep going with it, at that point, I was like, "I am over this book. I really don't wanna finish it, but I just feel like I
yeah,
can't not
yeah.
finish it." I was
Mhm,
reading it on my
mhm.
Kindle, and it said that I only had, like, I don't know, 2 hours left, an hour and a half. I'm like, "Rebecca, for the love, like, you can finish like, just 2 more hours, and you will be freed of this." I think that's another reason why I struggle sometimes to DNF books is if I have made it so far, and then I'm like, "Oh, I might as well just" like, if I can just force myself to finish these
Yes,
last 2 hours, like, what's
I
wrong with me?
know.
Like, I should be able to do that.
Yes, I get it. There's definitely, like, the sunk cost theory at play that once you have invested something, money or time into a thing, it's really hard to walk away from it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I
I
get
had
it.
reached out to the superstars through texting and gave them a little heads up that we were going to be having this conversation. And a few people, well, actually, a lot of people responded with their thoughts on DNFing a book. And one of the things that came up was quitting a book if you own it versus if you got it from the library. And that if you own it, that feeling like such a bigger deal to quit the
Mhm.
book. But if it's a library book, it's so much easier just to, oh, I just send it back because of like what you said. Like you haven't invested anything into it except for some time, right?
Yes, yes, yeah. Well, let's talk some specifics. What are some of the ones that you were like, "You know what? I got into it. I was not feeling it, so took the DNF path on that." Every time I say DNF, I'm afraid I'm gonna say the wrong combination for the abbreviation, so I feel a little insecure every time I say DNF. Which ones have you
you, you've gotten it right
put
every
on the end?
time.
So far. But let's hear what you put on your DNF list lately.
Okay, so I DNF'd a book by Jennifer Hartman called Wrong Heart. And this was another one that I really struggled with. In fact, I got this from Kindle Unlimited and it's still on my Kindle because part of me is like, oh, have I really abandoned it? Like for real, for real. And I think I have. I have. I need to just like get it off today. The reason why I Okay, so the reason why I didn't like the book is the premise of the book is that her husband dies and he is an organ donor and she falls in love with the man who got his heart.
Okay.
It's
All
like,
right.
yeah.
That
the
sounds like
reason
a pretty standard. contemporary romance setup. I can track with that.
Okay, so the reason why I wasn't liking the book is because this man is mean. He's just like there's a difference between grumpy sunshine and like a-hole sunshine. Like he just was like not
Yeah.
nice. And
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
was like, I don't believe this chemistry. I don't understand why she is so drawn to him. Well, I mean, it's her husband's heart. Like that's why. But like I don't believe this romance story because man, this guy's just mean. I don't like
Yes.
him. And if you're
Yeah.
not liking him, then why in the world are you reading the romance novel? Like it's not just like
Yes.
traditional fiction. It's a romance novel. You need to like the hero of the story. So my
That's true.
angst though came because Jennifer Hartman is an author that I love. In fact,
Okay.
she wrote my favorite book of last year, Still Beating. She's the trauma bond author that I really like.
Okay. I'm connecting so many things here that make this make more sense. Why you were having a lot of angst over it. All right.
So the struggle was real because I'm like, no, 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 no. How can I go from her writing my favorite read of the year last year to me quitting her book? Like, how does
Yeah.
that make sense? So I kept waiting to like get over. I kept waiting for like the chemistry to improve. I just kept waiting for like that thing. And this
Mhm.
is a good time for me to read this from one of the superstars. Pause here. I'm going to look for this. Hold on. Okay, so Nancy said that for her, it literally took her until she was in her 50s until she allowed herself permission to quit a book. She said, you keep thinking that the next chapter is going to
Yes.
be the one that pulls you in, and then you'll be so glad you read it. But how often does that actually happen?
Mm,
That's such a good point. Like, how often does that actually happen that you really just needed that one more chapter? And
yes.
somebody else said, Laura said, when people tell me, oh, stick with it for 50 pages and then it gets so good. She said, I say, I only read books that are good from the beginning.
Oh, look at you, superstar Laura. That's a
Isn't that
good
so smart?
personal policy. Yes. Yes.
Well, but going back to Rom Heart, I just didn't quite know how to rectify these two things in my mind of my an author I
Yeah.
loved writing a book I didn't connect with. And so eventually I
Mhm.
did DNF, but that is one that I significantly struggled with.
This is a total rabbit trail question that's just off to the side, a little sidebar. So, I was talking with superstar Kate recently. She is my yoga accountability partner. We text about other random things during the day, and she read a book that I had recommended last year on Sorta Awesome, and she really liked it, but she didn't particularly care for the ending. And she was like, I want to talk to you about this book. Here was my experience with it. Like, I really liked it, but the ending was just like a little off for me. And I was like, thank you. I actually really do feel the same way. And so we kind of talked about that. It was a really, really great book, but the ending felt a little rushed at the end. Like they tried too quickly to tie some things up. And that can be a frustrating
Do you want to
experience.
tell us what the book was?
No, I
You don't.
don't. I don't
I
want
knew
to.
you
People,
wouldn't.
people, it's a really, it was a very popular book last year. If people can
Oh,
DM
you
me if they
have
have
to
their
tell
guesses.
us.
No,
You
I'm not
have
going
to.
to tell you. This one is not one I can. I'm gonna, no, not going to do it. But if you want to DM me and ask me, if you want to guess, I will tell you. And so that's a thing. That's like a frustration. I don't know. I'm like actually trying to think, have I ever read a book that I really hated or I just didn't enjoy, but I stuck it out and then by the end I was like, I am so glad I finished this. I
Yeah,
don't
I don't
know.
think
Is
that's
that
ever
a thing
happened
that
to
even
me.
exists in the
No.
world?
No, instead I'm like, "Oh, thank goodness it's over," and just like throw it across the room.
Yes. Okay, tell us about some more books that I know that you had to make that really difficult decision to DNF recently.
Okay, so the latest was that I DNF'd A Quart of Wings and Ruin, which is book
Okay.
3 of the ACOTAR series, A Quart
Yeah,
of Thorns and Roses.
whatever. Thorns and Roses. Okay.
Yeah. Yes. I agonized over this. One thing that I have tried to do over the past couple years, as I have really zeroed in on reading romance, as I have told myself, okay, you can read only romance. That's totally fine. But there's actually lots of different types of genres within the romance genre. So why
Yeah.
don't you like explore some of that and try some of that and see what you really like? And one thing that repeatedly has been presented to me on social media and in my DMs is this idea of romantic fantasy.
Hmm.
And I've been pretty hesitant because I don't think that's my natural go to. I wasn't somebody as a kid who read a lot of fantasy, it just wasn't really my thing. But I was like, okay, I feel like I owe it to myself and like I owe it to the reading community. If there's like
Mm.
one thing I do this year, I actually made it one of my reading goals for the year is I want to explore the world of fantasy romance and see for
Okay.
myself for sure. Am I gonna like it or not? Because I can't tell you how many times I had mentioned on social media or on the podcast that I had never read Akatar. And then, like, it would be like an eruption of groans and disappointment from people listening. They're like, Rebekah, please, you have to read Akatar. Like, what are you waiting for? What's your problem? Well,
Yeah.
I read it and, like, I don't know, it's just not for me. Like,
Yeah.
it's just not for me.
I can see that. I actually have I've kind of realized I should just not give you book recommendations anymore because I just think our reading tastes are so different. With the exception, we do have some authors that we both do really like. I love Christina Lauren books, and I probably wouldn't have found them without your guidance. I don't know if I make that great of discovery. I know for a fact that one you that you didn't like, that you didn't name, that a lot of awesomes liked. I read it and I liked that one. I just don't think our taste always lines up. And so, as you're talking about, I haven't read the Akatar series either. As you're talking about giving it a try and not liking it, I'm like, I could have told you you're not going to like this, and I've never even read it.
Well,
But so you made it to book 3. Okay,
I
that's
did.
something.
I did. I made it to book 3.
Because those books are long, right?
Yeah, I listened to it on audio. Otherwise, I wouldn't have even made it through book 1 because
Okay.
I just would have been too distracted and bored with it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I when I was listening to book 3, it got to this point where everybody was sitting around and they were talking once again about like the history that goes back for centuries about who's mad at who and what happened in this battle and who cursed this person and yada yada. And I literally heard a voice in my head that says, I'm bored. I do not like this. And I was like, oh shoot. Ah, shoot. Well, I guess that's the end of this one. But like I felt bad about it because especially I had people tell me that they specifically think that I should read book 4. So like
Okay.
I was like, well, should I hold out for book 4? And then even just today,
Yes.
I got the notification on my Libby app that book 4 is available for me in audio. And I was like, well, should I start book 4 and just like skip it? No. What am I doing? See, why can't I just let it go?
That's so interesting.
I just need to let
That
it go.
is I do think that this is an interesting part that I hadn't even thought about, but if you are reading a series, and even especially I think if it's a series where you're not like waiting for the next one to come out, like maybe most or all of it is already out and there's a lot of hype around the series, and you get like you're in it's that thing of investment again. If you're like, I've already read 3 out of the 5 in this series, and you have to decide, am I going to push through to get through the series? That is such a complicating factor for sure.
Yeah, there was this other series that I read. I read this book. Now I'm not sure if I can remember even what the title of it is. It's called the Adrift series, I think. Shoot, what's the oh, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to figure this out. Hold on a second. Okay, so there was this other series that I read. It is called More of Us to the West. And I really liked it because it had this like trauma bond element to it, which I'm a sucker for.
Mhm.
We're talking plane crash, deserted island, people falling in love who aren't supposed to be falling in love. I mean, I just ate it up. I loved it so much. I could not get enough of it. And then I went on Instagram and I did a whole reel about it. And I don't even do that much like book reviews on my Instagram. I do from time to time, but they're not like super common. And I did a reel and I was like, we have got to talk about this book. You have got to read it. And then I read book 2 and I was like, oh, shoot. I should never have recommended book 1 because book 2 is vastly different from book 1.
Wow.
And then and they were like really long books and it was very, very different. And then I was like, okay, well, let me see is book 3 the last book? And Meg, it wasn't the last book. There was a hint of book 4.
Oh,
and
gosh.
I've kind of been like following along, and one of our superstars has been texting me updates because she read it based off of my recommendation, which I feel terrible about. And she's all invested. And guess what? There's a book 5. I cannot. I cannot. I'm like, and so I am so torn because I really want to know what happens to these people, but I don't want to invest like 3 months of my life reading these epically long books to find out. So I keep like kind of sending her these little texts like, can you just tell me this part? Like, do they ever like fill in the blank? And she responds back with, well, there's only so much I can tell. And I'm like, I can't decide if I want to read it or not. And like, Meg, I don't want to read it. I don't. I want to watch the movie maybe. I want to know what happens, but I don't want to spend like 3 months reading it.
Yeah.
And so I just need to let it go. And I think that that's part of it is like letting go and like not knowing how everything ties up. It feels like you're missing out on something.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Wow. Okay. That's a lot. It's a lot of angst, Rebekah. Were there any others you wanted to talk about?
Okay. Well,
name by name and call out.
Meg, this is so unfair. Right now, what are 3 books that you have DNF'd? This is so unfair. I even asked, okay, I want it noted. I asked Meg. This is so unfair. Meg, I asked you specifically, are we going to name titles? Or, because I know some people feel really bad about giving like negative reviews publicly and they feel really icky about that. And I was like, I suspect Meg might feel this way. And so I'm going to specifically ask her, how detailed are we going to get? And then you said, I think we can do it. I think we should do it. Name names is what you said. And then before we even started recording, you said to me, Meg, you said, are you legit prepared to say the titles of these books? And I said, yes. And then here we are, and I'm alone in this island of public scrutiny, and you have named nothing. Why did you bring me here? Very fair. Wow. What is happening?
I mean, if careful analysis of my words, I never said I was going to.
Oh, my word.
Well, look, I actually do have something to say about that. But go ahead. Let's get to your last one, and then I will explain myself, kind of.
And even after all that, you're still not even, you're just like, please just give us more of your trash.
Well, I want to give you your time to share.
Okay, well, the only other thing that I have been struggling lately to DNF that I'm like still currently kind of on the fence on, and this is maybe dipping into the TV land, is Grey's Anatomy.
Oh my
this show. Yeah. Meg, when I tell you this show, it's never gonna end. It is never going to end. And I am so bored of this show, but somehow I cannot get myself to quit because I'm like, well, goodness sakes, I have invested this many years of my life at this point. It's like on season 18 or 20 or something. I'm like, well, surely it's going to end sometime. Like, and I would love to see how it all ends, but it just keeps going and going and going. But what do you know, Meg? What do you know? When the superstars responded to my texts, like almost the only television show that was brought into the conversation was Grey's Anatomy. Like repeatedly, Grey's Anatomy. What is up with this? with this show. Let me see.
Well, and that's why it hasn't ended, because people keep watching it, even though it should have ended maybe a decade ago. I watched like 2 episodes of that from season 1 and knew it wasn't for me. Are you still watching it like in real time?
No, okay, so
Okay.
everything got pushed back like during the pandemic, right? Like things
Yeah.
like the
Yeah, yeah,
schedules of
yeah.
things got pushed back. Well, when Grey's Anatomy came
Yes.
back, they came back like the characters were living the pandemic. And I tried to watch it and I was like, no, like I can't. Like this is like they're doing an excellent job, but it is just too fresh. I cannot. And so I quit. I took a massive break and I didn't know if I was ever going to return. And then I talked to one of my girlfriends who's been watching the show since the beginning. I was like, how long do they stay in the pandemic? Because I just can't. I can't if they're going to stay
Mhm.
there. And she told me, oh, the
Yes.
next season, like they moved on and acted like it was fine and it was done and it was over. So I was like, okay, well, let me stick with it. So I eventually did get back to it. But now, because I took such a long break, I am like very behind and I only hardly ever watch it. I like sometimes I'll watch it when I'm painting my nails, but that's about it.
Mhm.
Alisa, a superstar, said, how could we know when we loved those first seasons of Grey's Anatomy that it would still be running over a decade later? That's such a good point. How did we know that we were signing ourselves up for a
Yes.
decade long commitment?
Literally, yes. That's how I feel about Supernatural, which went on for 15 seasons, that I watched every bit of, and that show easily could have ended after like season 7 or 8, and they just kept making it because people kept watching it, and I did watch it all the way through to the end. The ending was not worth the investment of time. If I would have known where it was going and how it was going to end, I would have given myself, it's the same thing. I would have given myself permission to quit a long time ago. So I do understand that so much. So much.
Okay, so now
I
what
also
is
did the
something that
same.
you have quit?
Okay, well, I did do the same thing in terms of like punishing myself through watching True Blood, which I haven't talked about as Sort of Awesome in years because it's out of production. But that's another one too, where like I had in I think it's a little different too. This is kind of a side question. Like, I feel like streaming adds a new part to the dynamic, a new decision to be made, because True Blood was a show I started watching in real time where if you were going to watch it, you had to watch every single Sunday night for those 10 episodes
Yeah.
when it was the season, and that's it. And so, but then by the end of True Blood, you could just binge the whole season. And so I think that's an interesting thing too when it comes to TV shows, especially long running ones, the ones that started before you could watch them on demand or watch streaming. You really do feel like this has been a part of my life for so long. And you're so invested in just the experience of it, as opposed to like if you start streaming a show and you get like 3 episodes in and you're like, yeah, it's not for me. You can pretty easily turn it off, right?
I'm having like a mind blown moment because I'm trying to think of anything else that I have stuck with as long, like since I've started doing streaming. And I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, I've quit plenty of shows since that I watched during streaming. Like I
Yeah.
can't even yeah, I think that's a big huge point. Like I think that makes a lot of sense.
And I think it comes back to the whole investment thing. Like the sunk cost thing, how much you've put into it makes it really hard. I looked through all of my Kindle, Audible, I looked around at my print books. I am way, way, way more prone to collect books and leave them on my TBR to be read and not start them, as opposed to starting and not finishing. I will say there are many books on my Kindle right now that I just saw on some like random TikTok, and
Mm.
I've read like 2 page I've read like 2 pages of, and then I was just like, "Oh, I'll come back to it." It wasn't that I didn't like it, wasn't like I was intentionally not finishing, I just get distracted. But Rebekah, one interesting thing that I uncovered in my reading habits is if a book is on audio, like 99% of the time, I will finish it. I feel more invested for some reason in the books I'm reading on audio than I do the ones that are in book form or in like on Kindle. And I don't understand what that is. But I can't tell you how many books that had I been reading it in print, I probably would have DNF'd because I just got bored or whatever. But if I'm doing it on audio, for some reason, I feel compelled to finish, even if I'm not into it.
Well, I think it's
Tell me
because
what that's about.
well, you can be doing other things. So it doesn't feel like
Yeah.
you're only sitting and reading the book. Like you're driving. What are you going to do
Okay.
anyway while you're driving? Like you're making dinner,
Yeah.
you're folding laundry, you're cleaning. So like your time isn't actually wasted versus when you're like actually
Yes.
reading, that's wasted time.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, that was just a very big realization for me. I had not until that moment actually intentionally thought about my reading habits in terms of what I finish and what I set to the side. I did find one book, and I am going to share the title of it, that was not for me. And that I actually intentionally was like, I'm making the choice to not finish this. It is a book I'm almost positive I either saw it on a TikTok or maybe I even saw the author on TikTok. It's called Lycanthropy and Other Chronic Illnesses. Lycanthropy is being a werewolf. And it's by
What?
Kristen O'Neill. Yeah.
Is this a
So,
fiction book or is this
Lycanthropy.
nonfiction?
It's a fiction book. It's a fiction book. Totally. And it's like YA. Is it fantasy? I don't know. Yeah, fantasy. It's like werewolfism, and the concept was really interesting to me. This idea that when you have a chronic illness and the impact of a chronic illness on your physical body, how it could be like the shape-shifting aspect of being a werewolf. I know. Okay, when I'm saying it out loud, it's a little bit of a hard sell. But you know me. This should be a book that I enjoy, right? As you're listening to me talk about it.
Okay. This is going to maybe make me sound really stupid, but I really thought that this was a nonfiction book when you first said the title. And I was like, this sounds like a textbook. This sounds horrible. What is this? Of course, this is what you DNF'd. Some like medical journal. Like I was very confused.
Which is why nobody should recommend fantasy books to Rebekah. She doesn't know.
When you
straight out of the gate.
When you watch this back to edit this for video, I want you to look at my face when you say the title, and it's gonna like all make sense.
Okay. So I thought this book, I was like, okay, I can dig it. I have a lot of experience, a lot of people around me that have chronic illness of different kinds. My family always jokes that I am a werewolf because my skin runs so hot, and just like it's a long-standing joke in my family. And I was like, this could be really good. And it's probably one of the few books, and again, I was reading it on Kindle, I wasn't listening to it, that the further I got into it, I was like, I love the concept of the book, but the execution of this idea is not hitting for me as a reader. Like it just was not tracking. And another thing too, Goodreads, it has really good reviews. It's like got over 4 stars on Goodreads and Amazon. So I was like, yeah, this seems like people are into it. And I'm sure it is a book that does speak to some people. But for me, I was just, the tone was a little off for me, the experience of it. So that one was probably one of, I'm trying to think when I even picked that up, sometime last year. And yeah, it just wasn't for me. So I set it to the side. But since most of my reading is on audio, and I have this weird compulsion to finish audiobooks, I haven't DNF'd books in a while. So I collect them and don't start them.
Yes, that's the whole thing. Do you feel any sort of obligation to the author? Because I did have a superstar reply that she cannot DNF a book because she feels too bad for how much the author has invested.
Yes. I have had that struggle in the past. And the other, I mentioned that one of the times that I just cannot DNF a book is if somebody recommends it for me personally and enthusiastically. The other case is for me, if I know the author,
oh, well, that's
like I will read it because I feel like, I I owe it to the person to read it. And I will say that I have grown in this. I've evolved. My understanding of this has evolved. I did for a long time, many years, probably like decades of being a reader. I could not finish a book because I did feel like I owed it to the author to honor their work by finishing the story. I think as I've moved into my 40s and I just have such more limited time with family and work and all kinds of things, that I've come to a place where I can both say, I really honor the fact that this author put a lot of time and effort. I know writing is so hard on so many levels, not to mention getting a book published. They've gone through a lot to get it published. So I can say, good job, you. You did it. You wrote the book. And also say, and also it's not for me as a reader. I'm not your reader for this book. But it's taken a lot of time to get to that place for sure. Do
This
you
is
struggle with that?
fascinating. No!
Okay.
No, not at all. This is so fascinating because for me, I feel like the act of reading a book is about what it does for me. I'm going into this thinking about me. I'm not thinking about what I am doing for the author. Like the author has already done their business. This isn't about the author.
Yeah.
This is about me and whether or not
Yeah.
I enjoy it. I mean, we will. This is in the case of authors being strangers, right? Like that has to be.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For
If
sure.
the author's a stranger, they don't even know that I'm reading the book. They're not going to know that I quit the book. How is this going to be like how are they going to care? This isn't going to hurt their feelings or their honor. They don't even know I have it. I've never once thought, "Oh, I can't quit the book because the author's put in so much work." That like literally has never crossed my mind.
That's so fascinating. So interesting. I would love to hear from the Awesomes if this is a hang up for them when it comes to quitting books. Yeah, there's so many ways that we have some common threads here and definitely different ways of viewing these. Okay, well, Rebekah and I have a few more thoughts on just the whole topic of DNFing books and a few more thoughts from the superstars to share with you. We're going to get to all of that when we come right back. Okay, we're back. Rebekah, like you mentioned, you were texting through our texting app, which is one of our perks for being a Superstar Awesome. The superstars support us on Patreon, and we're so thankful. And one of the things you can do is text with me and Rebekah and other people on the team. And so you ask them, like, what are your thoughts on DNFing books or TV shows? What are some of the other things that some of the superstars shared?
Well, we really got a variety of responses back because this is such a varied topic, how people feel about it. So we have like Amy who says, I'm going to be 50 in October and I have never DNF'd a book. Just can't do it.
Whoa! Never?
Never.
Wow. Okay.
Okay. Also, Katie, we know her from the Currently Reading podcast. She also never DNFs books.
What?
I know. She reads like
Okay.
300 books a year. How does she
And
not?
she reads them. Okay. Like she's really in there. She's really reading them. Wow. I am amazed. Okay. Okay.
But then I had lots of other people who said, like Lisa, she said, life is way too short and there's too many good books, shows, and movies to get stuck behind something you're not enjoying. And I think for me, that's like the key. That was the thing that really kind of changed my mind about DNFing to give me even greater permission to do so is the idea of getting like stuck behind something I'm not enjoying. Because what I have found is if I'm not liking a book, happens is instead of opening the book, I open up TikTok. Instead of opening the book, I scroll Instagram. I do like all these things to kind of like keep procrastinating putting off the book. But when it's a book or a TV show that I am like really into, I can't hardly put it down. Like I'm looking for like any little moment to read that book.
Right.
One of the hosts from the Faded Mates podcast, they were doing like a question and answer time, and they read like a ton for their podcast and just like life for them in general. And one of the questions for them was like, so how do you read so much? And one of them responded, well, because I DNF so much. I can read more when I DNF more. And I
Yes.
kind of think that makes sense.
Yes, I absolutely agree. It goes back to that concept of sometimes you have to cut things out of your life just to make space for the things that you want to bring into your life. I am much more prone to that philosophy, except apparently when it comes to audiobooks, that don't hang on to something that feels like drudgery when you could be, like you said, discovering something that you absolutely cannot wait to get to and to get through. So, yeah,
Definitely.
that's interesting.
Going
Yeah.
along with this, Anna said, my current goal is to quit anything that makes me avoid reading. Relatable, right? Like that's what we're
Ooh,
talking about. She
yes.
goes on to say, one thing that has helped me is having an abandoned book list in addition to my finished book list. Then at least I feel like I got some credit for the pages that I read. Because, Meg, one thing that we
Okay.
have not talked about is what about when you are tracking your reading and you have a
Yes.
reading goal for the year, whether you're
Yeah.
public with that or it's just your own personal business?
Yeah.
That is something that I struggle with. If I'm 80% through a book and I'm like, this is dumb, I want to stop, or I am bored, I feel like, oh, but I should, if I quit now, then I can't actually finish it. Or if I quit
Yes.
now, then I can't count it towards my reading.
Right. That makes sense. I will say at the beginning of 2022, when I was super into the idea of tracking your reading through the year, I watched so many booktubers, YouTubers who focus on book content, walk through their reading journals, and more than a few have a section every month for their DNF'd books just to give themselves credit because they tried a book. I do think it would be a little bit messier if you are a person who has a reading goal for the year. If you're like, I'm going to read 52 books this year. I think for me, and this is probably why I don't do reading goals, is I I think I would get really tangled up in my mind and be like, well, I have to read a book a week if I'm going to make this goal, and so I've got to just push through it. I got to finish it. So I think if you have a goal in mind, if you track your reading, I think that that could be a huge factor. It doesn't necessarily play in for me, but I can see that. That makes sense.
Well, listen to this scandalous take from D.
Ooh.
She says, if I'm a ways in, I also count it on Goodreads. And I found that
Ooh.
shocking.
I wonder
So
I
I
wonder
sent
if
her
she has an objective number. Yeah.
so I sent her a follow-up text and I said, "How far do you have to be into the book to still count it towards your reading goal?" And she said maybe 40%.
I am shocked. I
I'm
thought she was gonna
shocked
say, like,
too.
if I make it 75% in, then I'll say, "Okay, I finished it." That's some creative counting of pages, D. I
That's a
respect it.
wild take. It's a wild take. I'm going to say it.
I
Meg's too nice. She's not, but I'm saying it. That's a wild take.
The English teacher in me would never allow that in my own personal reading life, but hey, do what works.
I have to say, though, that the idea of not actually reading every single page and it's still counting towards your reading goal is a very liberating idea.
Yeah.
You and I did a podcast a while back. I think it was sometime last year about birth order. And I bought a book specifically about birth order. And I would say that I probably read at least 75 to 80% of that book. And I
Mhm.
was kind of mad at myself because I was like, oh, I've read so much of this book, but I haven't read every page. So I can't really count this towards my
Yeah.
reading goal. But like,
Yeah.
what if I did? Like, who's checking up on me? Like, what if I did?
At the end of the day, it's just you and your conscience, and you just decide what you can live with. I think 75% is reasonable to say I read that book. I think with nonfiction books, genuinely, I think there's a different standard there. Like if you read a book about birth order and
Mm.
you're like tracking and you're like, okay, I get what they're saying. This makes sense. I don't think you necessarily have to read to the very last page, including the acknowledgments at the end. Like, I think you
Oh,
can just be
well,
like, "Okay,
yeah.
I get it."
So Sarah says that she feels like TV is easier to quit because she's not tracking episodes on an app like Goodreads. but for TV.
Right.
So I really do
Yeah.
think that this idea of us tracking, like, are we at times hurting ourselves? Are we helping or are we hurting ourselves with all this tracking that we're doing? I don't know.
Yeah.
The overwhelming response that I'm getting from people is similar to what Christy says. She said, quitting things like books and TV is empowering. It's a reminder that I know myself and no one can push me into wasting my time on something that does not bring me joy. And just this idea again and again of people saying life is too short to read bad or boring books. There was a really heartwarming message that came from Julie. She told me a story about when she was going through cancer treatments and that she was reading a book that she wasn't really enjoying, and a fellow patient next to her receiving treatment asked her what she was reading, and she kind of like rolled her eyes about this book that she doesn't really like. And this patient next to her kind of giggled and said, life's too short for books we don't like. And then given their circumstances, it was, I mean, it's just so profound. Like in those cases, like it's something we
Yes.
can just like say sometimes, but not really soak in and feel like we mean it. But like
Yeah.
in that situation, it really hit her hard. And so ever since then,
Yeah.
Julie has been more willing to give up on books that she does not like because unfortunately life is too short for that.
Yes.
And lastly, the fellow co-host, the co-host from the Fated Mates podcast that was like so pro DNFing books, her name is Jen. She put out a tweet that said something very similar to, take the number of reading years that you hope to still have in your lifetime, multiply that by the number of books that you tend to read per year. And that number that you're left with, that small number compared to all the books that there are in the year, or that there are in the world, that's the only reading you have left. Why would you spend one of those on a book that you're not enjoying?
Oh my. That is a very eye-opening way to look at it. And I wholeheartedly endorse DNFing books for all of those reasons. Like, you guys, we have permission. Now, in the case of someone like Katie Cobb, I mean, she literally reads for her job. She's a professional reader. So I can understand that sometimes you like literally have to, but for those of us who are hobbyists, yes, your time, you are worth picking something and doing something that you really enjoy. Especially because for most of us, reading is a hobby or something we do in our downtime, in our free time.
Yes.
Like, let me just tell you, let me just look you in the eye and say, you in your free time are worth it to only read books that you are really loving, that you're really into, or at least at the very least that you want to give a chance. So please feel free to DNF to your heart's content. Okay. Anything else on your
No,
end?
I think we're good. I think
Okay.
this is a good place to wrap up.
Yes. Okay. Well, if you do want to talk more about books, reading, DNFing, books that you're loving, books that you now maybe hesitantly want to recommend to either of us.
Oh, dear.
Rebekah, where can people find you all around the web?
My website is simplyrebekah.com. I hang out the most on Instagram at simplyrebekah.
Okay. You can find me on social media at Sorta Awesome Meg. You can find the show just by searching Sorta Awesome, whatever platform you are on. We would love to see you there. Awesomes. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see y'all next time.